In November of 2016, Oakland actor and playwright Dan Hoyle began work on his show Border People. Based on conversations and interviews along the southwest border and the Canadian border, the projects of the South Bronx, it tells the stories of people who cross into this country either by necessity or by choice. The show is playing at the Marsh San Francisco Theater January 11th through February 23rd. Ahead of the world debut, we're happy to have Dan Hoyle join us live on the 9 this morning. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
This play started before the current border crisis began. Did you ever think it would be so timely?
Yes and no. Part of what I've been seeing in the last few years is this growing tribalism in our politics and culture, and so I thought, and it was so counter to what I was seeing in the work I've been doing for 15 years, going out and talking to people and getting their stories and making theater about it, that so many people are hybrids and so many people are cultural border crossers. And so when this talk about who is an American got sort of more and more constricted, it made me want to show stories of people who are culturally hybrids, and so that kind of began there.
A lot of hyphens, as I like to say. There are a lot of immigrant stories, young, old, male, female, educated, uneducated. Tell me about some of the people you met.
Sure. So it started, I got interested in refugee safe houses on the border with Canada. And I went up, these are folks that are trying to get asylum in Canada because it's much tougher in the U.S. And then also a lot of folks who were just scared after the inauguration of Trump. And so I was up in Buffalo, New York, and I met this guy, and he had this sort of cool haircut. And I said, "Oh, you have a cool haircut." And he was like this, 19-year-old kid. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is my prom haircut." He's this Afghani guy who had gone to school in the U.S. and was now fleeing to Canada because his mom and sister were fleeing because they were leaving Kabul. And it was like, he's like, "Yeah, a lot of my friends after graduation, they're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take a gap year and study permaculture in Thailand." I'm like, "Oh cool, I'm gonna go flee to Canada." So he was completely literate in sort of high school cultural memes, right, and then also has this amazing backstory.
So many people talk about the American dream. A lot of immigrants hear from relatives who may already be in this country and say, "Wow, if I make that move, I'll get a good job, get a BMW, have a nice house." That dream is so often not the reality. Do you deal with that sort of crushing realization?
Sure. There's lots of stories. I mean, immigrant stories, refugee stories are incredible. I mean, part of the thing that was so surprising to me and so incredible to me is refugees are like the most American, like the 1950s, like Dwight Eisenhower type Americans. Like, they are often religious, faith strong, small business, super entrepreneurial. They don't take American citizenship for granted at all. They will like recite to you parts of the Constitution. So it's kind of interesting when you get into the nitty-gritty of how what the core of Americanness exists in so many different ways.
And so how would you urge people who may not be able to make it to see your show to think about the issue of immigration?
Well, there's some interesting things. Like, first of all, the number of people that are that are coming across the southern border is way down from what it was 15 years ago. I did a ride around with the Border Patrol. And I also got pulled over by Border Patrol one time because I had Phoenix rental plates, and I was way down on the southern border, and he's like, "Yeah, what's your purpose of travel, sir? Okay, you're an actor and a playwright? Okay, do you have financial support for this, sir?"
Right.
And he was sort of baffled by who I was, but then I ended up interviewing him, and he ended up interviewing me because he was interested in sort of theater and comedy
and he
and
has
stuff
his
like
story
that.
to tell.
And he has his story to tell, and he was saying, personally, I don't really think a wall is the answer, and sort of he was like, this whole border crisis thing, it's like, slow your roll, bro. Like 15 years ago, it was like 1.5 million people detained per year crossing the southern border. Last year it was like 350,000. So in terms of numbers, it's way down from what it was.
More than the numbers. It's the people and their stories you're working to get out. I want to get more people to your show. We have all the ticket information you need for Border People on KTVU.com. You'll see it at the Marsh Theater. Find it in our web link section under the Mornings on 2 tab. It is also on our KTVU mobile app. Dan Hoyle, thank you for joining us again here on the 9.
Thanks so much for having me again.
Of course.